Well, welcome to the show. Today we have a true pioneer in corporate culture and behavioural change. Our guest has spent 2 decades working with the world's most respected organisations, from Google to Coca-Cola, designing and delivering award-winning immersive training programmes. He is the CEO of Yes, an expert in experiential development and the author of the transformative book, The 7 Questions to Find Your Purpose. Please welcome Richard Jacobs. Hi, Richard, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to be here. Excellent.
Really looking forward to chatting to you today, Richard. And to kick things off, I'd love to ask you if you could briefly introduce yourself and tell the audience a bit about your business, Yes, and the kind of high impact work that you do with your global clients.
So, we've been working, the business was formed into the year 2000, but I was working in training stuff for a few years before that. And what seemed to come clear quite early on, actually, was that there were 3 aspects to driving change in organizations. One was strategy, where we're going, how we're going to get there. 2 was processes, what are the teams and tech that underpin the strategy. And 3 was mindset and behaviors. And that none of those 3 were optional, except almost nobody was dealing with mindset and behaviors.
Right.
And that has become the entire focus of the company. So basically, we work in large scale behavioral change with organizations. It could be 10,000 people that we work with, but the largest project we've done so far is 80,000 people in 70 countries.
Wow.
And sometimes much smaller programs. But essentially, how do you get a measurable change from this state to this state where people are thinking differently, where they're behaving differently with each other, where they can go into a seminar and on Monday morning, they are literally behaving in a different way. And that's become the speciality area. And so the way of getting there is experiential. I mean, nothing teaches like experience. And so I create pieces of interactive theatre. We create various different immersive environments. I use what I call conscious play, serious play a lot, so that people have an experience and then learn reliably from that experience and can apply it every day from there.
It sounds like an amazing challenge, but one that I can imagine is really rewarding. You obviously work across a vast spectrum, from global corporations to local government and M&A integration. What's the fundamental difference in approach when designing a culture change program for a corporate merger versus, say, one for community or public body?
Actually, there's not much difference. The truth is, everybody says that there should be in the et cetera, and I've gone into every program that I've ever created with a blank piece of paper. But the reality is that when I've done work with some of the top consultancies on the planet, or with Google or with Coca-Cola or with the European Union, or I've done work with refugee groups, NGOs, the approach that we've ended up taking has been the same, because people don't change very much.
Yeah.
What we're looking at is mindsets and behaviors, and we share the same stuff all over the planet. It doesn't change very much. There are cultural nuances, but the way we function and the things that we value and what creates shifts actually doesn't.
It's fascinating. So we're all human at the end of the day, aren't we? And you'd like to think that most people have a similar set of values as the basis of the mindset. Your firm specialises in bespoke training and coaching. What's the greatest advantage this custom approach gives your clients, and what is the biggest operational challenge it creates for your business in terms of growth and delivery?
That's a good question. I mean, yes, there are challenges, but it also keeps it interesting and exciting rather than, rinse and repeat, copy and paste. One of the things, so let me give an example, and that will give an idea of how the bespoke kind of rolls out. So one of the things that we do a lot is interactive theatre.
Right.
So I'll go into Google or Coca-Cola or Procter & Gamble or whatever, find out what the issues are that people are facing, create a piece of theatre based on those issues, funny, engaging, irreverent, but the funnier it is, the more serious it can be. We'll then have a group of people turn up to that show. Could be 50 people, but it's more like 300-400 people. We show the piece of theatre and people say, okay, yeah, that's it. That happens to us, blah, 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 which of course is based on their stories. It ends in sort of disaster for the lead character. And then we stop and we start again and we say, okay, 500 people, 10 years experience piece is 5,000 years worth of experience. What does it know? And we re-navigate the story, but this time the audience intervenes. They come on stage, they change the action, they speak to the characters, they replace things, they try out ideas, they build on each other's ideas, and we improvise around them, and they create their own path through it. So they're teaching themselves using the stage as a bouncing board. So in coming back to your question then, what are the challenges? The challenge is we've got to understand the cultural nuance so that the play feels like it's at home for them,
Yeah.
that people feel like it's there. We have to really understand the issues. We have to understand the issues from a behavioural and psychological perspective rather than an operational perspective. The actors are not going to be able to improvise around the operational minutiae of most organisations, but that's not what we're there for. We're there to help to trigger the behavioural change. And so they can improvise around the behavioural nuances of it. So there is a lot of bespoking for those pieces of theatre.
Yes.
However, the actual process of driving change within those people is not different. You give them opportunity to make a difference, and you're asking similar questions every time. What would you like to happen here rather than what you expect to happen here? What's the highest possibility that we can go for? Are we literally arresting a situation? So are we stopping a situation, or are we changing things fundamentally? How do we know that we've changed things, etc.? So those kind of questions and that approach is pretty universal, but the bespoking of the pieces of theatre, for example, are very specific.
And I guess from it being so organic, you see many light bulb moments occurring amongst the people that you're delivering it to, which I imagine is really rewarding.
It's, I think, probably some of the most beautiful moments in my. I've had the great fortune of, I guess, training, working with about 400,000 people, and one of the greatest moments, or some of the greatest moments of that entire career, has been those times when you see, when there is a tangible, palpable difference. And sometimes it's a life-changing moment you see in one or two people at the moment, and sometimes it's whole swathes of people. People are always moved. They always make a change based on the programs. But sometimes those changes go very, very deep. And it's touching even just to think about it.
I can imagine. Yes, totally. And so am I right in saying that you create bespoke audio and video as well now, and online media for development?
I mean, we have done for many years. We started doing that in 2010, which is sort of a bit ahead of its time, really. And what we did was we started creating interactive graphic novel programs that people could watch online, where they could see videos, they could see different ways that situations could be played out. They could download behavioral frameworks, could be around feedback, or it could be around leadership or management or diversity and inclusion, anything, all the kind of behavioral issues that we look at. So video, audio, anything that gives people, I don't think people spend a lot of time reading. They've got to have more intuitive ways of absorbing information.
And what's the most effective medium, would you say, for driving that lasting behavioural change?
Well, okay, so this has gone through a big shift in the way we do things now compared to 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we'd have created like a piece of theatre, so the big trigger moments where people make a shift. And then we'd have sustained that with media, with these interactive graphic novels, training trainers in-house, etc., so that these things could continue. Now, however, what we do is we do the interactive theatre, which we often do online as well as face-to-face.
Right.
So that people can join. We create essentially it looks like a 3D environment for the actors to be mapped into. So it looks like they're in people's workplace or they're in a neutral territory, but actually in reality, the actors are in different locations around the world, being mapped into this space. So it's kind of funky and fun. That lends itself very much to a very iconic graphic way of showing the information, but also means that now we've created an AI which will start to beta test towards the end of this month or early January, where you as an organization can look at some of the situations that came into the theatre or into the online version, and then you can literally role play with any of those characters using the AI.
Wow, amazing.
So then you've got something in your pocket which is always timely. You can have conversations as tough as you would like, get expert coaching feedback, behavioral frameworks, and different sentence stems and triggers, and have it in any language of the world.
What a fantastic tool to have in toolkit there.
So that's really the most exciting innovation, I think, that we've seen and experienced.
That sounds really, really impressive. And beyond personal purpose, how do you apply the framework of the 7 questions to help organisations navigate complex change events such as mergers and acquisitions?
So there's a simple answer to the question, but it's never quite as simple as that initial answer. The truth is that when people answer very simple questions, but they go deep with them, They come into answers that are going to drive and change them, affect their behavior. So if you understand what the purpose of your organization is, and you understand how that purpose is augmented through a merger or through an acquisition, then how you roll that out is pretty obvious and clear. The difference is engaging other people within that purpose.
Yes.
So understanding the purpose, developing the purpose of an organization is not a difficult piece of work. It's a rare piece of work, but it can, you can do that with an organization or with the heads of an organization in a couple of hours. The real trick is, how do you get people to buy into that, to engage with it? And how do you get it to enter into people's decision-making process so that your purpose is front and center in every meeting, in every project, with every significant decision that one makes, in all your recruitment, in all your talent management, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a fractal of your DNA.
Of course.
Sounds like a very
posh
sentence.
Yeah. So making people realise the benefits of using that process, I guess.
But in a lived way. Because, one major organization we went into, we were talking about values, purpose and values. And they said, we've got a set of values. We've had a set of values for 125 years. What's going to make you think that we do so and so? And we said, fine, I'm sure you've got your values. I can see them on your website. But I'd like to do a test. I'd like to walk in to your office and I'd like to go up to random people and ask them what their values are and what they think of them.
Yeah.
So we started doing that. This particular organization, their values were literally etched in stone, literally carved into stone above the reception area of the building. Everybody went into the building and these words were 10 foot high on the concrete, on the walls above the reception area. So now I walk into the building and I'm going around, I'm sitting there and say, hi, I'm Richard. I just want to ask you a couple of questions. What are the values of the organization? People I think we've got one about, is integrity one of them? I don't know if integrity is one of them.
Wow.
If you don't know if integrity is one of them, how can you start applying integrity as part of your, decision-making process? There were 5 of them. They didn't know about what they were. So even if you know the words, it doesn't mean that you're being them.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point you've raised there. It's all very well having something written, like a mission statement or your values, but if they're not being instilled into your corporation, then there is no value in those values. So totally
exactly.
From that's fascinating.
Just marketing otherwise. It's like difference between talking about nutrition and actually changing one's diet.
Absolutely. I'm amazed that they weren't even aware of what those values were.
Organizations, I think I was having this discussion with somebody 2 days ago, actually, who had worked in Google and had worked in LinkedIn and a number of other organizations. And we were saying, actually, there's probably only 2 to 3 companies that we've ever met in our careers who were really applying purpose on a daily basis throughout their workforce. And those companies are spectacularly distinctive.
That's a real eye-opener, actually, and quite shocking, to be honest. Your programmes are pioneering and award-winning. How do you protect and standardise the quality of your unique IP when training coaches and facilitators and change agents around the world?
So standardising, protecting them is, you have to ask a few questions basically about protecting them. We make it very clear that what is our intellectual property. It's built into all our contracts and all our frameworks, all the behaviors that I develop and all that sort of thing are all very clearly outlined in our materials and things like that. So people can't they're not allowed, it doesn't mean they don't, but they can't take it and then use it elsewhere. How do we standardize it? Actually, for me, I want to take the behaviors that are super effective in a whole variety of areas and then iconize them into language-based prompts. Because those are the easiest ones to make sure that you action. In the same way as we tell our kids, say please and thank you, because those are going to lead to a certain amount of courtesy and politeness, etc. That the difference between using yes and yes but is going to lead to building a conversation compared to closing down a conversation. So it'll trigger a dynamic. When people listen, if one answers it, if I'm listening to you and I respond with, oh, is that a bit like, or actually, that reminds me of, or in other words, it seems to me you're saying, and I summarize you, but with those kind of questions, you'll know that you're being understood. I'll know that I've understood correctly, and it won't interrupt the flow of the conversation. So it's the language-based prompts that give us the standardization, which then sponsor different behaviors that people can bring to the table.
Great. And given the high level of customization in your work, what is the biggest logistical or technological hurdle that prevents you maybe from efficiently packaging and distributing your core methodologies to a wider audience, maybe such as smaller firms or international markets?
So I think that's actually being solved now much more with the AI.
Right.
Because, I was asked a couple of years ago, how do we take, this piece of interactive theatre and this experiential stuff and put it in 40 different languages? And 40 different languages will, even with bilingual and trilingual teams of actors, would still require a huge amount of scaling and the amount of training. And you'd still need to have probably 30 odd teams which are moving around the world. That's a massive and it's a very high level of refined skill to be able to deliver a program like that. So very, very difficult to achieve. But using the Wisdom app, which is the role play, we can then program that in. That can work in any language of the world and give people a lived experience through which they can learn and have bespoke feedback immediately. So we think that AI will handle a large proportion of it. And also, when we do interactive theatre online, people can have translation.
Right. So really, AI is opening up that world to you, that those opportunities, and you see that as a real opportunity for growth in that case.
Massive, huge. And also the other side of it is that one of the biggest limitations that people in learning and development, human resources, say that they have is they say they've got amazing digital resources. They say the problem is not having the resources, the problem is getting people to use them.
Yes.
And people are terrified of their time and super protective of it. And there's a glut of information, and what do they click on, and do they go down a rabbit hole of stuff, and is it really useful, and how long do they give something before they understand if they're getting value for it? And the interactive theatre is a big showbiz, funny, engaging launch of a program, which then people continue on a personalized basis, on their phone or on their desktop. So we think we've got around that issue.
It sounds like, you've got it to be really engaging and something that will make people want to take part and to continue using, rather than something that they see as, oh, not that again. So that, that's an amazing place to be. Culture change is often seen as intangible. What would you say are the most critical measurable KPIs that you track to prove the return on investment of your bespoke programs to, say, CEO?
So it's a different set of metrics. Culture is a different set of metrics, and there is a body of metrics which can be applied, but they're not necessarily. Some are direct, some are indirect, and then there's a section of those. And there's about 10 to 20% of the metrics need to be formed after the initial phase, not beforehand, because a cultural change is going to take us. If a change has to create a movement, which means that people within the organization take it upon themselves to drive that forward because they have ownership of it.
Cool.
If they're doing if they're saying somebody's told me to do this, therefore I'm going to do that, that's compliance. That's not culture change.
Yeah.
So the shift they take ownership of, which means that the ways that you're going to be able to see that culture coming back are not always the ways that you've predicted are going to show up at the outset. So, for example, we're talking about working with various different sales forces is that it hits bottom line. They're making more sales.
Yeah.
Or they're converting, or they're having better conversations and they're valuing those conversations. If you're talking about let's say something around the engagement of people, the relationship between managers and their teams, you're going to take a lot of measures, some of which are going to be qualitative. So in 360-degree feedback, what are the different questions you're asking and how those are shifted? Some are going to be quantitative. How many sick days are people taking?
Right.
Some people are going to say, well, in diversity, equity and inclusion, what are the measures around that? And are we recruiting people of, more diverse backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera? That's one measure. That's fine, but it's not behavioral. The behavioral measure is what are the quality of the ideas that are coming out? What percentage has there been a shift in how people feel included in those conversations? Are we generating collective intelligence in our meetings, or are one or two people still dominating?
Right.
How do we start to take the habitual issues that people have just have kind of resigned themselves to accepting exist within the corporate world, look at the alternative, and then start to measure the progress between one and the other. So there'd be a variety of different metrics according to the issues that we've been asked to shift the culture around. And then there's a section which we will develop after the initial stages, because we start to observe that actually what we thought was happening here around meetings is actually having a big impact over here around recruitment and talent management.
And like you mentioned earlier, sometimes you can see a shift happen almost immediately after your first delivery, which is amazing, those light bulb moments. But I guess there will be some areas, perhaps one thing leads to another, and it's an organic process which takes time, which is why
it does take time. But I think the myth is that cultural change takes a long time. Everybody tells me they're super convinced by it. This cultural change takes 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't. It just doesn't. It doesn't have to. If you look at this thing, the structure, strategy, processes, mindset, behavioral change, is the 3 areas of organizational change. When you come up with a new strategy, it takes a long time for that to filter through. If you're going to change your tech in a large organization, that takes a long time to train people in the new tech and to roll it out. But you can change your behavior now for your next meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the quickest of all of them.
So
yeah, go ahead.
And you really see that then, do you? That instant change, that instant sort of penny that drops.
Yeah, we've seen it many times, especially when it comes, if you've got a very specific set of issues that you want to shift, behavioral issues that you want to shift, then you see that immediately. I mean, literally from the morning to the afternoon, you can get 500 people. It gives you a good measurement. You get 500 people in a room. We do the piece of interactive theatre with exercises, with behavioural frameworks, and they will leave the room and they will be different in the afternoon, and different the following day, and different the day after that. And after that, it starts to become habit. It starts to become expected practice. We've seen that we've introduced I used to do this thing when I was at school where we would wonder, a few friends of mine and I, we would wonder if we introduced a phrase that didn't mean anything and kept on saying it, how long would it take for other people to start to use it? And it didn't take very long, 2 or 3 days, actually. The same is true in an organization. If we started to bring in sentence stems, let's say you've talked to a group of people who are this managerial level A, for argument's sake, and they start using these phrases. How long does it take until the people who are working with them are using those phrases without even thinking about it and without even ever having been in the same training program?
Absolutely.
That's a measure.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And this infectious nature of the words that we choose to use and
completely
roll out. So I can see that. What do you find about sort of longer term? Do you find that companies sometimes ask you to come back again because perhaps things are starting to slip back to their old ways, or do you see that often that change is permanent?
They tend to call us back for different things,
right? Because they've seen how effective happening in that area, I guess.
The conversations of the events that we're doing with Google this year are completely different to the events we did last year with them.
Right.
Totally. Obviously, I can't talk about what situations we're dealing with there, but they're very, very different. Do people go back? I mean, you get some atrophying, that you get changes of people and some new people come in and things like that, but you never get the same fundamental need to create a shift. It's always a yes and, it's always a growing. It's always a growth or a build on something that one's done, or it's a new subject area.
Well, that's really impressive. Then it shows that the sort of profound effect that your work must have on the people within these companies and the change in that culture, which is really impressive. As an expert in experiential development, your time is obviously your highest value asset. Where do you find yourself spending the most time on tasks?
It's very intensive creating piece of theatre. So a lot of time can go down there. Obviously, it comes in waves. In the running of events, there are lots of moving parts. So a lot of it is project management around that. There's quite an intense focus on, a lot of people unconsciously see an event as, okay, once we've come to the end of that event, that's all we need to do. Thanks very much. That's fantastic. But actually, running an event is the beginning of something, not the end of something. So a lot of the intense attention of time is getting people to sustain what they need to sustain internally in order to help that movement get to critical mass.
Of
that
course.
shifts inside. Yeah. And also to help people. And a lot of time there's probably as much, if not more time, getting organizations to have the internal conversations they need to have.
Yeah.
There's more time spent getting them to do that than there is in actually us doing the work that we are there to deliver, in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And going forwards now, what is your growth goal over the next, say, 12 months to 2 years? And how do you go around working with new clients and new corporations?
So, whilst we will carry on doing bespoke programs, we're finding that in certain areas, we're not seeing anything new in terms of issues. We might have 10 very significant organizations asking us to do programs on inclusive leadership at the moment, or around a shift in a sales philosophy, etc. And whilst I go there with a blank sheet of paper, we're not seeing anything new. So we're thinking, well, actually, the next stage for us is to say, we will take a piece of theatre, we'll take it to a town, we'll go to London or to Paris or New York or wherever, and we'll run that for a dozen different organizations at the same time. So they can leverage the collective intelligence. Decathlon can learn from Google, who can learn from P&G, who can learn from etc., because these are behavioral things. They're not specific to their organizations and stuff. And then be able to use the Wisdom AI, which is our role play AI, on the back of that. So that's become mass. The events are still bespoke to the people who come.
Yeah.
We know that the issues are still painfully relevant to them. We'll do our research and everything beforehand, but the reality is they don't need to bear the cost of running an event just for their people. They can share that and they can increase their learning because they're getting different perspectives.
Of course. And would you, so in that scenario where you've got a number of different corporations attending that one piece of theatre, do you try and sort of match their similar sectors or approaches, or do you like to have a complete different array so that there's different views and viewpoints and ways of doing things in one room?
We want to match the behaviors that they're finding difficult.
Right.
And
Cool.
those behaviors can exist in Google, they'll exist in some circumstances. In Coca-Cola, they'll exist in other circumstances. In an NGO, they'll exist in different circumstances, but the behaviors are actually the same. And if people are engaging with that piece and can understand how to shift and change those behaviors, it almost doesn't matter. It's less helpful to think I only need to change this behavior in this context or this context. Actually, I need to be able to recognize that behavior and make a difference in that moment.
Of course, absolutely. And how, that's obviously really crucial that you're focusing on those same behaviours across different companies. But how do you find out which behaviours each company needs to work on? Is that sort of by going and having meetings beforehand and then saying, right, I think you would all be suited to this piece of theatre? How would you sort of come to that conclusion?
Good question. So we're constantly interviewing and having conversations to find out what the issues are and what the behaviors are, where there are sticking points, and what the impact of those behaviors are. So that's on a constant basis, which means that I feel like we're not really out of touch with that. I think we're very, very connected to those. So then when that turns into a piece of theatre for a number of organizations, you're pretty much there every time because the conversations are ongoing. Nothing is in a vacuum. How do they stay relevant? By continuing to have those conversations and by making sure that we're talking to organizations who are not just within the catchment of the ones that we're working with. Working with small companies, working with medium-sized organizations, working with people in completely different sectors. But you know what? The things that we do in Europe, there are different cultural nuances, but are being echoed out in Asia, are being echoed out in the States. I'm always amazed at how similar some of these issues are.
It's fascinating. Yes, you've worked with some huge corporations, so there'll be a lot of recognition from the work that you've done with these companies. But how do you go about sort of finding new clients?
We've never done a single piece of marketing in 25 years.
Wow.
Or PR or anything like that. It's all been word of mouth, literally from the very first seminar we ever ran. So everything has been that and continues to be so. So that's the only answer I've got for you, really.
Brilliant. That's really impressive. That sort of really must speaks for itself, really, about the impact that your work must be having, for that word of mouth to continue to help you to help other companies?
You know what? I think one of the things, though, two of the things. One is the work is really human. It's
Yes.
very real. It's about the way people are, and people respond to that. It's not trapped in jargon. It's not trapped in a certain kind of verbiage. People feel real. Second thing is there's a lot of humor.
Right.
And people don't, like, decision makers don't necessarily understand the value of humor in that way. They think it means thinking often can make people frivolous. It doesn't make people frivolous. Actually, it makes them show up. And it prevents the inhibitions that a lot of people have in participating.
Right.
It also means that they don't take themselves so seriously. The more people laugh, the more areas of their brain light up, the greater their ability to have far-reaching and innovative ideas, the more they listen to other people, the less they protect. It creates an environment which is so conducive to accelerated growth, accelerated learning. And it means that you can harvest and channel collective intelligence because people will be listening to each other and building on each other's ideas. And you know what? If you have the opportunity of going to a deeply serious seminar or one which is going to make you laugh, which one are you going to choose?
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally relate to that. It obviously acts as an icebreaker.
Very much so. Yeah.
And finally, I'd love to ask you, what would you say is the single most important piece of advice that you would give to a leader who's currently struggling to get their team to embrace the necessary change in this?
I would probably invite them to shift roles and shift perspectives straight away. So one of the things that I often say to my son when he was much younger was I'd be having trouble getting across something that I thought was really important, probably because it was future focused. And so I'd say, look, if you were me, what would you be saying to you? And then suddenly they would change it around and then they'd have done both sides. So I would look at, I think it requires a lot of authenticity. So I'd say a leader needs to be genuinely listening to people rather than listening in order for them to feel heard and then telling them their point of view. I think genuinely listening. I think they have to say, okay, this is what we're looking to achieve. This is what we think is the way to achieve it at the moment, but it may not be perfect. My feeling is that people either don't get that or they're not really on board with it. I don't know which one it is. So I'd love to know which one it is. But I'd also like to say, well, if you were in a leadership position, knowing that this is where you need to go, what kind of conversation would you be wanting to have with this team?
Very powerful. I love that idea of the role reversal. What would you do if you were me? That's really interesting. And I guess that's actually a really powerful thing for people to think about. Because like you say, people so often are just stuck on their own point of view and not really thinking deeply about the other person's point of view. And I can imagine that's such a powerful tool to use and to actually focus on what people are saying to you.
I also heard a quote long time ago, which kind of shaped a lot of my thinking. It said, a true leader doesn't create followers. A true leader creates other leaders.
Right.
And this invitation to start thinking from this different perspective means that actually we're starting to stimulate, or we're continually, I'm seeing you as the member of my team as a leader and as capable of making leadership decisions and having leadership thinking. So we're constantly flirting and playing with that space, which is cultivating you as much as it is informing me.
Fantastic. It sounds like such an amazing thing that you're doing, Richard. And I can imagine it's really getting people within organisations to think a lot more do day to day. They go through the route of running their business and working within the business and not taking that time to think and evaluate themselves and how they are working within those spaces. Thank you ever so much for coming on today and talking to me about it. And I wish you every success for the future.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. So thank you for your great questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Bye.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.